Lightmare by Isaac Petrov. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The sky above Morcombe Bay was a brooding tapestry of dark clouds, swirling ominously as if they carried the weight of an ancient grudge. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the coastal town, rattling windows and sending loose debris skittering across the cobblestones. Fishermen hurried to secure their boats, their faces etched with unease. The bay, usually a serene expanse of blue, churned with frothy waves that crashed against the shore with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient. In the heart of the town, nestled between a weathered bookstore and a shuttered bakery, stood the Driftwood Inn. Its sign creaked on rusted hinges, and the faint glow of lanterns spilled from its windows. Inside, a small group of locals had gathered, their voices low and urgent. Among them was Eleanor Hart, the town's unofficial historian, her silver hair catching the dim light as she leaned over a map spread across a wooden table. "This storm isn't natural," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've seen this before in the old records. The last time the clouds looked like this, the bay swallowed 3 ships whole, and the town wasn't the same after." A young fisherman named Tom, his hands still smelling of salt and fish, frowned. "What are you saying, Eleanor? That this is some kind of curse?" Before she could answer, the door to the inn burst open, and a figure stumbled in, drenched and breathless. It was Sarah, the lighthouse keeper's daughter. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "The lighthouse?" she gasped. "The light went out, and I saw something in the water, something huge." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like the storm outside. Eleanor's gaze shifted to the map, her finger tracing a line toward the bay's deepest point. "If the light's out, the ships won't stand a chance," she murmured. "And if what Sarah saw is what I think it is, we're in more danger than we realize." The group exchanged uneasy glances, the storm's fury growing louder outside. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, its mournful sound echoing through the town. The darkness over Morcombe Bay was no ordinary storm, and the secrets it carried would soon be unleashed. Chapter 2. The Lighthouse's Secret. The group, spurred by Sarah's urgent warning, decided to investigate the lighthouse immediately. Eleanor insisted on bringing the old records with her, tucking them carefully into a waterproof satchel. The wind tore at their coats as they made their way through the storm-lashed streets, the rain stinging their faces like icy needles. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible against the roiling sky. As they approached, the absence of the guiding light was palpable. The tower stood dark and silent, a stark contrast to its usual beacon of safety. Sarah led the way, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys to the heavy iron door. Inside, the air was damp and cold, the spiral staircase winding upward into shadow. "It wasn't just the light," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the hollow space. "I saw something, lights under the water. They moved like they were alive." Tom exchanged a worried glance with Eleanor. "Lights under the water? That doesn't make sense." Eleanor's expression grew grim. "It does if you believe the old tales. The records speak of a time when the bay was said to be haunted by spirits, lights that lured ships to their doom. But I always thought they were just stories." As they climbed the stairs, the storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling like a wounded beast. When they reached the top, the group found the lighthouse's mechanism in disarray. The great lens was cracked, and the room was littered with shards of glass. But what caught their attention was the faint glow emanating from the bay below. Through the rain-streaked windows they could see it, pulsating lights beneath the surface of the water, moving in strange, deliberate patterns. The sight sent a chill through the group. "Those aren't spirits," Tom said, his voice low. "They're too organized." Eleanor opened her satchel and began flipping through the old records. "There's something here," she muttered. "A passage about a pact made long ago, between the town and something else, something that lives in the depths." Before she could read further, a deafening crash echoed from below. The group froze, their eyes darting to the staircase. The sound of heavy footsteps began to climb toward them, slow and deliberate. Sarah's face went pale. "We're not alone." The storm outside seemed to hold its breath as the group prepared for what was coming. The lights in the bay grew brighter, their movements more frantic, as if responding to the presence in the lighthouse. The secrets of Morcombe Bay were rising to the surface, and the group was about to face the truth, whether they were ready or not. Chapter 3. The Pact Unveiled. The sound of heavy footsteps climbing the lighthouse stairs grew louder, each step reverberating through the group like a drumbeat of dread. Eleanor snapped the old records shut and shoved them back into her satchel. "We need to leave." "Now," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Tom nodded, his face pale but determined. "There's a back stairway. It leads to the rocks below. We can slip out that way." Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting toward the staircase where the ominous presence was ascending. "What if it follows us?" "We'll deal with that later," Eleanor said firmly. "Right now, we need to regroup and figure out what we're up against." The group moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the howling wind and crashing waves. They descended the narrow back stairway, the cold sea air biting at their faces as they emerged onto the jagged rocks below. The storm raged around them, the bay churning with unnatural ferocity. The lights beneath the water were still visible, their eerie glow casting strange shadows on the waves. Once they were a safe distance from the lighthouse, Eleanor pulled out the old records again. The group huddled under the shelter of a rocky overhang, the rain pounding above them. "The Pact," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "was made over 300 years ago. The entity in the bay, it's not of this world. The townspeople agreed to ensure that no offshore activities would disturb its domain. In return, it would protect the bay and its inhabitants." Tom frowned. "Protect? This storm doesn't feel like protection." Eleanor shook her head. The pact was broken. Someone must have violated the agreement. The lights under the water, the storm. It's all a response. The entity is angry. Sarah's eyes widened. But who would break the pact? And why? Eleanor's gaze darkened. "That's what we need to find out. If we don't restore the balance, the bay will consume everything. The town, the ships, even us." The group fell silent, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the lights beneath the water seemed to grow brighter, more menacing. Somewhere in the distance, the faint toll of the town bell echoed, a mournful reminder of the danger they faced. As they prepared to make their way back to the Driftwood Inn, a new question loomed. Who had broken the pact, and how could they possibly make amends with an entity that was not of this world? Chapter 4. The Broken Pact. The rain lashed against the rocks as the group clambered their way back toward the Driftwood Inn. Every gust of wind howled like an unseen force, whispering warnings in their ears. Eleanor clutched her satchel tightly, her mind racing. If the records were right, the town had been living under the illusion of safety for centuries, but now that illusion had shattered. As they neared the inn, a figure loomed in the shadows of the doorway. It was Captain Henshaw, the old harbor master, his face creased with years of hardship and salt air. His piercing blue eyes flicked over the group before he stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "I know why you're here," Henshaw said gruffly, bolting the door behind them. "I heard Sarah's story, and I know about the lights." Eleanor frowned. "Then you know about the pact?" Henshaw nodded slowly and slumped into a chair by the fire, shaking rainwater from his coat. My grandfather told me about it when I was a boy. He said the sea demands respect and that the town made a deal to keep its waters undisturbed. But I fear someone, some fool, has gone too far." Tom stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Henshaw's eyes darkened. "The new offshore rig, the one they started building a few weeks back. It's drilling into the seabed, right where the old stories say the entity sleeps." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor's hands trembled as she unfolded the records again, scanning the faded ink. "It's written here," she murmured. "Disturb not the black depths, lest the storm awaken and reclaim what was given." Sarah's voice wavered. "If it's the rig that woke it up, how do we stop it?" Henshaw's gaze was grim. "You don't, not unless you're willing to make an offering." Eleanor inhaled sharply. "What kind of offering?" The harbor master sighed. "The same as before, a life." The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the storm howled in fury, as if it too was waiting for their answer. Chapter 5. Defying the Deep. The silence in the Driftwood Inn stretched thin, each person trapped in the weight of Henshaw's words. A life. The very idea curdled in Eleanor's stomach. No matter what had been done in the past, she would not allow Morcombe Bay to descend into bloodshed. "No," she said, her voice steady. "We're not offering anyone to that thing." Henshaw exhaled sharply. "Then the Bay will take what it wants." Tom clenched his fists. "Not if we stop the ones who woke it up in the first place." Eleanor nodded. "We need to go to the offshore rig. If they disturb the entity, they need to shut down the drilling immediately." Henshaw snorted. "You think they'll listen? That rig is backed by money and politics. They won't stop because an old woman and some fishermen tell them a sea monster's angry. Then we make them listen," Tom said, "one way or another." Sarah looked out the rain-streaked window toward the raging sea. "How do we even get there in this storm? The rig's miles offshore." Henshaw drummed his fingers on the table, thinking. "There's a supply boat that goes out every night to bring the workers fresh provisions. It's docked in the harbor right now. We could sneak aboard, take it straight to the rig." Eleanor's gut twisted at the risk, but they had no choice. If the rig continued drilling, the entity's wrath would only grow. "Then that's our way in." Henshaw stood, reaching for his oilskin coat. "I'll take you. I know the waters better than anyone." "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "I'd rather take my chances with the storm than sit back and wait for the Bay to swallow us," he said gruffly. Tom and Sarah exchanged a glance, then nodded. Their path was set. The journey to the rig. The harbor was a maelstrom of crashing waves and lashing winds, but through the mist and darkness, they spotted the supply boat. It rocked violently against the dock, its mooring ropes straining. Two workers in heavy raincoats were loading crates onto the deck, their faces obscured by the downpour. Henshaw motioned for the group to keep low. "We wait for the right moment, then climb aboard." As they crouched behind a stack of barrels, Eleanor whispered, "And when we get there?" "We find whoever's in charge and make them stop," Tom said, "by any means necessary." A particularly violent wave slammed into the dock, momentarily distracting the workers. That was their chance. One by one, they crept onto the boat, slipping into the shadows of the cargo hold, just as the engine roared to life. As the vessel pulled away from the dock, Eleanor felt a deep, unshakable sense of dread. They were heading straight into the heart of the storm, into the domain of the entity itself. And whatever awaited them on that rig, it wasn't just going to let them leave. Chapter 6, The Depth Stir. The supply boat lurched violently as the storm worsened, rain slamming against the deck in torrents. The crew above shouted to one another over the roaring wind, oblivious to the hidden passengers below. In the cramped cargo hold, Eleanor clutched the satchel of records to her chest, bracing herself against the wooden walls. Then, without warning, a sound cut through the storm, a deep, guttural rumble from beneath the waves. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the wind. It came from below. Tom's head jerked up. "Did you hear that?" Henshaw swore under his breath. "That wasn't the storm." Sarah, her face pale in the dim lantern light, whispered, "It's waking up." The rumbling grew into a groaning tremor, vibrating through the boat's hull. Then came a sudden shockwave, as if something massive had shifted in the depths. The boat pitched violently to the side. The cargo hold tilted. Crates tumbled, smashing open. Eleanor and Sarah were thrown hard against the wall, gasping as seawater gushed in through unseen cracks. "Brace yourselves," Henshaw bellowed. Another shockwave hit, and this time it was followed by something worse. A deep, unearthly wail rising from beneath the water, a sound so low it rattled their bones. The boat lurched again, then came a deafening crack. The deck above splintered open. Cold, dark seawater poured in. A wave surged through the opening, knocking Tom off his feet and sweeping Sarah toward the jagged hole. Eleanor lunged, grabbing her arm before she could be dragged out. "The ship's breaking apart!" Tom shouted. Above them, the confused cries of the crew turned to panic as the boat began to sink, swallowed by a massive whirlpool that had formed directly beneath them. Henshaw grabbed Eleanor's arm. "We need to get to the surface now!" One by one, they fought their way up the tilting stairs, battered by freezing water and falling debris. Eleanor gasped as she reached the deck, only to be met with a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. The sea itself was collapsing inward. A massive, swirling vortex had formed beneath the boat, dragging it down like a giant unseen hand. The rig was now visible in the distance, its towering lights flickering, unaware of the hell that was rising from the depths. The boat tilted dangerously, its stern lifting as it was dragged toward the vortex's center. "No time!" Henshaw shouted. "Jump!" Eleanor hesitated for only a second, then she leapt into the black, churning water. The plunge. The sea swallowed her whole. Icy darkness pressed in from all sides, stealing the air from her lungs. She kicked desperately, fighting against the pull of the vortex. Through the chaos, she glimpsed flashes of movement. Sarah's outstretched hand, Tom struggling against the current. Something huge moved in the depths below. A shadow passed beneath her, vast and impossible. It was no fish, no whale. It was something else, something ancient. She broke the surface just in time to see the boat disappear, sucked down into the abyss. For a moment, there was nothing but the howling wind and the crashing sea. Then a bright searchlight cut through the rain, the rig. Henshaw's voice rasped through the darkness. "Swim! Before it comes back." Chapter 7. The Calm Before the Storm. The rig's towering floodlights illuminated the water, casting eerie, wavering beams across the now perfectly still sea. The storm, which had raged only moments before, had vanished. The ocean was as smooth as glass, a millpond stretching into the endless night. Eleanor, Tom, Sarah, and Henshaw swam desperately toward the platform, their limbs heavy with exhaustion and cold. A rope ladder was hurriedly unspooled from above, bouncing against the steel framework of the rig. "Over here!" a voice called down. One by one, they hauled themselves up, gasping as they clambered onto the grated deck. Warm hands grabbed them, dragging them to safety. Eleanor collapsed onto the wet steel, coughing up seawater, her hands still gripping the satchel of records. "Jesus, where did you lot come from?" The speaker was a broad-shouldered man in a high-vis jacket, his weathered face lined with concern. Around him, several workers stood, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. "The supply boat," Henshaw rasped, shaking water from his coat. The man frowned. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Gone," Tom repeated darkly. "Pulled under." Murmurs of unease rippled through the workers. A few exchanged nervous glances. Another worker, a younger man with oil-streaked hands, rubbed the back of his neck. "You must have hit the reef. It happens out here." "No." Eleanor's voice was hoarse, but firm. "Something took it." A hush fell over the group. The broad-shouldered man, who Eleanor guessed was the site supervisor, exhaled. "All right, let's get you inside before you all freeze to death. We'll talk then." Inside the rig. The control room was warm and brightly lit, humming with the low drone of monitors and machinery. Maps of the seabed were tacked to the walls, alongside schedules and maintenance reports. Eleanor could see a radar screen flickering lazily in one corner. A few workers handed out dry blankets and steaming mugs of coffee. "So," the supervisor said, sitting down across from them, "let's start over. I'm Bill Haynes, foreman of this operation." He folded his arms. "Now tell me, what the hell happened out there?" Henshaw leaned forward. "You've got to shut this rig down." A stunned silence followed. Bill blinked. "Excuse me?" "The drilling," Eleanor said, pulling the old records from her satchel. "You've disturbed something, think it, something ancient. The storm, the sea swallowing the boat. It's a warning." A few of the workers chuckled uneasily. Bill's face, however, remained impassive. "You're serious?" Sarah leaned forward. "Dead serious." Bill sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I don't know what you folks have been through, but we're not shutting down the rig over some ghost story." "It's not a ghost story," Tom snapped. "We saw the lights. We heard it. You felt it, didn't you?" At this, a few of the workers hesitated. A younger man, still wrapped in his raincoat, shifted uncomfortably. "There was something strange earlier," he admitted. "A tremor bigger than anything the instruments predicted." "Exactly," Eleanor pressed. "And now the sea is still, too still." Bill hesitated, looking at his crew. "Even if I wanted to, I can't just shut down drilling. That order comes from the company." "Then call them," Henshaw said. Bill exhaled sharply. "I'll talk to them, but I'm telling you right now, they won't stop for some sea monster story." Eleanor clenched her fists. They needed proof, something undeniable. Then, from one of the monitors, a soft beeping began. One of the workers frowned, stepping toward it. "That's strange." "What?" Bill asked. "The seabed sensors, they're detecting movement. Something huge is shifting down there." The tension in the room snapped. Bill's expression hardened. "Show me." The worker adjusted the screen. The sonar image flickered into view. A massive, shifting silhouette loomed beneath the seabed. It was unnatural, an amorphous shadow that stretched far beyond the reach of the screen. A cold shiver ran through Eleanor. Henshaw muttered, "I told you, it's waking up." The Millpond Sea outside wasn't peace. It was the entity waiting. Chapter 8, When the Deep Calls. The room was deathly silent, all eyes locked on the sonar screen. The shifting shadow beneath the seabed pulsed, almost as if it were breathing. Eleanor swallowed hard. "There's your proof." Bill Haynes, usually a man of rigid logic, stared at the monitor, his jaw tightening. "How deep is it?" The worker at the console adjusted the settings. "We're reading it at 60 meters below the seabed." His voice wavered. "That's impossible. Nothing that big should be moving down there." A beat of silence. Then a second beeping. Louder. Urgent. "What now?" Bill demanded. The worker's face paled. "It's rising." The words sent a cold wave of dread crashing through the room. "Send a distress call to the mainland," Eleanor said quickly. "They need to know what's happening." Bill snapped out of his trance and turned to another crew member. "Get me a direct line to HQ in the Coast Guard, now." The worker rushed to the radio, adjusting the frequency. Static crackled through the speaker as he tried to reach the mainland. "This is North Sea Rig 11 emergency broadcast." Then from deep below came a sound. A thunderous resonant moan, low and inhuman, reverberated through the steel foundation of the rig. The entire structure shuddered, as if something was gripping it from beneath. The workers froze. Then the first explosion hit. The rig lurched violently, a metallic groan echoing through the control room. Warning lights flared red, and alarms shrieked across the platform. "What the hell was that?" Bill shouted. The worker at the sonar monitor scrambled for answers. "Something just struck the support pylons. The whole structure's destabilizing." Another deep, shuddering impact, this one stronger. The floor jerked beneath them. Tom grabbed a railing as equipment crashed to the floor. "It's attacking the rig." Through the control room windows, the Millpond Sea was no longer still. Beneath the oil platform, a massive black silhouette moved just beneath the surface, coiling like a living storm. A worker pointed, his face twisted in horror. "Oh my God!" The water began to rise, not in waves, not from the wind. The sea itself was being lifted, as if an enormous force was pushing it upward from below. Then came the first tentacle. It breached the surface slowly, a monstrous appendage slick with black water, glistening under the rig's floodlights. The workers staggered back as it curled around one of the massive steel legs supporting the platform. Another limb rose, then another. Bill Haynes, the hardened foreman, visibly blanched. "Mother of God!" The radio operator yelled. "Coast Guard, do you copy? We need immediate evacuation. The rig is under attack." A blast of static, no response. Eleanor turned to Bill, her voice urgent. "You believe us now?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the sea, his mind snapping between fight or flight. "Bill," she shouted. His eyes flicked back to hers. "We need to evacuate now." The rig shuddered again, another massive blow striking the foundation. A sharp metallic snap rang through the night. One of the lower pylons had fractured. "We don't have much time," Henshaw muttered. Through the growing chaos, Eleanor locked eyes with Tom and Sarah. The entity had given its warning. But something told her this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Chapter 9. The Last Transmission. The rig trembled under another massive impact, the steel framework groaning like a dying beast. The tentacle coiled tighter around one of the support pylons, crushing it with a screech of bending metal. "The whole platform's coming down," a worker shouted. Eleanor clutched the railing, bracing against the violent tremors. "Bill, we need that distress call out before it's too late." The radio operator was already scrambling, frantically adjusting frequencies. "This is North Sea Rig 11, emergency transmission. We are under attack. Repeat, the rig is under attack by an unknown entity, requesting immediate Coast Guard air rescue." A deafening screech cut through the air. The radio speakers burst into static. For a second, the entire control room went dead silent. Then, "Rig 11, we copy." A burst of relief rushed through Eleanor's chest as the distorted voice crackled through the radio. "We have your distress call. Hold your position. Helicopters en route. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Another violent shudder tore through the platform. Metal screamed as a second tentacle breached the surface, wrapping around the structure. "We don't have 15 minutes, Tom muttered. Bill grabbed the radio. "Coast Guard, this rig's coming apart. You need to hurry." "We're at full speed. Hold on." Eleanor turned to Bill. We need to get everyone to the helipad, now! The race to the helipad. The group bolted through the shaking corridors, alarms blaring as emergency lights flickered overhead. The deck tilted with every impact, making it harder to run. Workers poured from every doorway, some carrying first aid kits, others grabbing emergency flares. The stairwell leading to the helipad loomed ahead. Bill threw open the door, only for the rig to lurch violently, nearly tossing them off their feet. Sarah screamed as the wall beside them buckled, crumpling inward as a massive tentacle smashed through the steel, tearing through the structure like paper. Henshaw bellowed. They scrambled up the stairs, stumbling onto the exposed platform of the helipad. The sky above was clear, the storm long gone, a cruel illusion of peace in contrast to the horror below. Eleanor turned, her heart seizing at the sight. The entity was rising. The ocean swelled beneath them, lifting something colossal from the deep. The tentacles were just the beginning, a mere fraction of the monstrous form emerging from the abyss. Black, glistening skin breached the surface, slick with brine and unearthly phosphorescence. A maw of impossible size yawned open, glowing with the same eerie lights they'd seen beneath the water. The entity had eyes, not human, not animal, but something older, and they were looking directly at them. Sarah clutched Eleanor's arm, whispering, "It sees us." The platform buckled. The rig was going down. A distant thumping sound echoed through the sky, helicopter rotors. "They're coming!" Tom gasped. Eleanor turned her gaze upward. Two massive Coast Guard helicopters appeared over the horizon, their searchlights sweeping over the sinking rig. Bill grabbed his radio. "Coast Guard, we're at the helipad." A third impact rocked the rig. The radio slipped from his grasp, tumbling over the edge. "No time!" Henshaw roared. "We need to start getting people aboard." The helicopters hovered closer, deploying rope ladders as the downdraft kicked up spray and debris. Workers rushed forward, climbing desperately, but there were too many of them. "There's not enough space for all of us," one worker shouted. Bill turned to Eleanor. "What do we do?" The entity below let out a low, mournful wail, and the ocean surged higher. The rig was seconds from total collapse. Eleanor clenched her fists. She knew not everyone was getting out alive. She had to make a choice. Chapter 10. The Final Ascent. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the first workers scramble up the rope ladders, their hands white-knuckled with fear. The helicopters hovered above, their rotors kicking up a furious wind, but there were too many people and not enough time. She turned to Tom, Sarah, and Henshaw. "We can't just leave them." Tom swallowed hard but nodded. "We help?" Henshaw gritted his teeth. "Damn right we do." Sarah looked at the writhing mass of tentacles below and shuddered. "Let's make it quick." Bill Haynes was already shoving workers toward the ladders, barking orders over the screaming alarms. The rig groaned, tipping further to the side. It wouldn't hold much longer. Eleanor grabbed a younger worker who had frozen in fear. "Go! Climb now!" He snapped out of it, scrambling up the ladder. More workers climbed, the helicopters straining under the weight, their pilots yelling over the radio to hurry up. Then it happened. A tentacle surged up, wrapping around the closest helicopter's landing skids. The massive aircraft jerked downward, its rotors straining against the weight. The crew inside shouted in terror as the machine veered sharply, swinging dangerously close to the collapsing rig. "It's trying to drag them down," Tom yelled. The pilots fought for control, their engines screaming as they pushed to full power. The tentacle tightened, the helicopter dipped lower. The workers still climbing the ladder screamed, clinging for their lives. Eleanor felt pure dread claw at her gut. If the helicopter went down, they were all dead. Then rig gave one final violent lurch. The steel framework snapped, sending massive support beams crashing into the water. One of them slammed into the tentacle, wrapped around the helicopter, momentarily stunning the entity. The grip loosened. "Now, full power!" the pilot shouted. The helicopter jerked free, rising higher as the tentacle slid away, coiling back into the depths. The survivors on the ladder barely managed to hold on as the aircraft pulled them up. Eleanor gasped, relief surging through her, until she saw the second helicopter still hovering, low. Bill turned to them. "That's our ride! Go!" The rig tilted further, the deck splitting apart as fire erupted from below. There was no more time. Henshaw shoved Eleanor toward the ladder. "You first, damn it!" Eleanor grabbed on, climbing fast as the last of the workers followed. Tom and Sarah were right behind her, their faces streaked with sweat and sea spray. Henshaw was the last to grab the ladder, just as the rig collapsed completely beneath him. A monstrous wave surged up, swallowing the wreckage whole, and with it, the entity disappeared. Into the sky. The helicopter pulled away, the rig vanishing into the black abyss below. The second chopper had escaped as well. They had made it. Eleanor clung to the ladder, her breath ragged as she looked down at the ocean below. It was still again. The mill pond's surface returned as if nothing had ever happened. But Eleanor knew better. She met Sarah's wide, fearful eyes. "It? Let us go." Tom swallowed. "Why?" No one had an answer. As the helicopters banked toward the mainland, the workers shaken but alive, Eleanor stared down at the empty sea. The entity was still there, watching, waiting, and this time it had given them a warning. Epilogue. Buried beneath the waves. The official report filed by the government stated that North Sea Rig 11 collapsed due to structural failure and an unanticipated seismic event. No mention of the entity. No mention of the unnatural stillness of the sea. The surviving workers were debriefed separately, their accounts carefully documented, and then dismissed. Bill Haynes, once a respected foreman, was pressured into silence, his company forcing him into early retirement. Tom and Sarah tried to push back, demanding answers, but the moment they started talking, government officials appeared on their doorstep, warning them to let it go. Henshaw, the old harbor master, disappeared one night. No one knew where he went, and no one dared to ask. As for Eleanor, she never returned to Morcombe Bay. She didn't pack, didn't say goodbye. One day she simply left, taking the old records with her. The town, the bay, the entity beneath the waves, it was all in the past. Or so she told herself. But sometimes in the quiet hours of the night she would wake up gasping. The memory of those massive glowing eyes seared into her mind. And sometimes, when she turned on the news, she would catch a report about a fishing boat vanishing without a trace off the coast. She never watched long enough to hear the details, because she already knew. The entity was still there, waiting, watching, and one day, it would rise again. The end.